Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session, the Adaptive PMO series. Looks like we have quite a lot of people on the line here, so thank you everyone for joining. We have a lot to get through today. I'd like to welcome Lindsay Scott from PMO Flashmob to the session today. Lindsay is the founder of PMO Flashmob and a director at PMO Learning, the sister company to PMO Flashmob. Her experience and work with PMO leaders is abundantly clear in her knowledge and experience. Through PMO Flashmob and PMO Learning, there are tons of great learning resources and training. I highly recommend checking that out if you're interested in career advancement or continued education. She's also the creator of London's first dedicated PMO conference, PMO Director of RS People and PMO Enthusiasts. I've also learned that she loves dogs and gin, two very wonderful pastimes. So welcome, Lindsay. Thank you much for joining us today. We'll go ahead and let you get started on that. I will stop and let you take over the reins here.
Yeah, hello everybody. Nice to see there was a lot of PMOs in that introduction, so as you can probably imagine, really into PMO stuff. And what we're going to be talking about today is about the AI PMO. And what I'm going to do is just I'm just going to stop my video while we go through this session. So hopefully that will make sure that there's no interrupt. One of the things I'd like to talk to you about today is some insights from some real PMO practitioners, actually PMO managers. We're not experts by any means. There's regular PMO practitioners that have found themselves entering this world of artificial intelligence. And the way that we've essentially done this is through PMO Flashmob, but an inquisitive lot, and have been thinking about and looking into artificial intelligence for the last couple of years now, right from the, what on earth is this, to starting to understand how it might impact the role. So everything we do at Flashmob is all about understanding what real practitioners are doing, what can we learn from them, and what insights can we take, and then we share it with other people. So what we do on a annual basis, we pick a theme basically that we want to talk about, and we get people around a table, and here they are, and put questions to them about around the theme. Which one of the things that we've found through Flashmob is that there's been a number of questions over the last couple of years that have been popping up all the time, and some of these questions are the things that we managed to find insights from the people around the table. And one of the things that when we first started to explore this about AI in the PMO is that it becomes quite apparent quite quickly that we need to understand what we're talking about here, because I don't know about you, I'm no expert. I've been learning this stuff for the last couple of years, but there are no real answers out there. For PMO, we're all trying to, to find our way. But again, just trying to understand what some of these things are, because I don't know about you. I mean, I was brought up in the 70s and the 80s, and artificial intelligence just makes me think of really bad sci-fi movies and robots and things like that. And so when people started to talk about, well, AI is going to impact the way that we do work, obviously we're interested in, well, how is that going to happen? So when we talk about AI in the report that we pulled together, and this presentation is going to show you some of the insights from the report, and you can go and read that report in its entirety afterwards. These are what we're talking about. So when we talk about artificial intelligence and technologies, we're talking about things like machine learning, which for people that are not familiar with it, it's essentially systems, computers being able to automatically learn and improve without being programmed, which is frankly sounds quite scary, but we're already using it. Automation in terms of customer service help desks, or even some organizations now who are making better project estimates. We're also talking about predictive analytics, which probably feels a little bit closer to home in terms of PMO, which is the use of statistics and modelings from facts and data in order to be able to try and predict future. Well, wouldn't that be amazing if we were able to do a lot more of that in the project arena? But again, it's already happening with things like Netflix. When you get in your, you go in there and you've got some choices that they've put in based on what you've been watching. It's just simple stuff. But actually, how does that apply to us in the PMO world? And then the other aspect, which is slightly different from the others, which is about robotic process automation. And that's about how we can get the robot to do the boring stuff. So take away some of the repetitive tasks that we do that a machine could easily do for us. And very close to home with this one, because it's all those cut and paste jobs that we do in PMO. If we think about all the reporting that we do and so on, and moving of data and information. So these are the things that we're talking about, just so we're all on the same page in terms of what we, it's AI technologies. Throughout this session, you'll hear me refer to it, and that's what we're talking about. It's that collectively. One of the things that we did about the report was about the threat or opportunity. We wanted to know what people were really thinking about this, because what we've been hearing is that PMO could actually be under a threat by this. It could actually be phased out because AI technologies could do reporting and analysis better than we could. But the opportunity, so is it such a threat? Because actually, if we think about, everybody here on this call who's working in project management knows that it's about people. If we were just all pieces of data, maybe we would be under threat. But unfortunately, we've got this strange thing with people that get involved in projects, and it kind of puts a bit of a spanner in the work in terms of automation and AI and stuff being able to really impact that. So there's a threats and opportunities. And when what we looked at a little bit more in more detail is each aspect of it. Well, where is that threat? So when we were talking about automation, is that some staff within the PMO that are doing a lot of the cutting and pasting and those aspects, that part of the job, but today is a necessity, could eventually be out of work and the role disappears because the technologies could take over. However, if you remove those tasks, we have that opportunity to do more higher value work from the PMO, which is what we're screaming out for. But everything that we're talking about today in this session is very data driven. It is about data. It's data that is, essentially the bedrock for a lot of technologies. So it is the data that we're talking about. So from a threat point of view, if we're wanting to be a data driven organization, the problem we have is the people that work within it have a lack of data literacy. Analytical and behavioral skills, and actually we become irrelevant because we're not skilled in that area and thinking about what we need to be and skilled up in a data-driven organization. But if we are able to develop these skills, that we are able to do things with the job in terms of decision enabling and with more predictability and certainty, which ultimately is what business leaders are looking for. With the data, unfortunately, a lot of the time, and still is the case now, one of the biggest barriers is that data is very siloed and very, remains unavailable to us. But it's not something that couldn't be overcome. But in order to be able to do that, the opportunity is that the PMO can become upskilled and potentially new roles in there that allow us to gather and analyze data. So again, we're evolving and pushing that PMO on. And then finally, I've always said that from a PMO point of view, our main objective, our main job is to enable decision making for our business leaders and senior execs. So with decisions, the behavioural change is needed to accept the new normal is very slow to appear. However, if we can overcome this, and there's a big if, being able to have an unambiguous and unbiased data will allow us to give information and insights that will ultimately allow decisions to be made that will really drive positive action. So for every threat, there absolutely is an opportunity. And again, let me remind you, it's from real practitioners who are working in the field today that have found themselves in these situations within their organizations. So one of the things about we wanted to understand where the drivers for this were coming from for these particular people, because you could be sitting there at the moment and say, well, our organization's just not there at all at the moment, which is fine. But it could be a different case tomorrow. So one of the external drivers is from a business point of view, and there was a report out from PwC, which was really interesting. And these reports were from 2019. So the gap between the information a CEO needs and what it's been getting is not actually closed in the last 10 years. Accenture also did a report at the same time using technology to give humans superpowers equipped with new skills and capabilities to achieve more and learn faster. I mean, this kind of stuff is going to sound irresistible to some business leaders. From a project management point of view, PMI always great at coming out with course of the profession reports, and they again have seen that progressive firms are adopting AI, and it also happens to be that those organizations seem to be able to, do better at the project management side as well. But the other things with project management is actually what some of the benefits of this are. So, for example, AI will be enable us to reduce human error. It'll be able to allow us to increase our predictions. We'll be able to automate those simple tasks that obviously will help us save time, get better insights from data, those informed decisions that need to be made. Projects with improved outcomes, so we save time, it's more effective, and real-time data about performance allows us to be able to identify and correct problems, as and when they're happening. So it's definitely compelling. I think we can see that. And then always good to see a line from Gartner, which is always, seems to be a bit of a high-catching one. So by 2030, 80% of project management will be eliminated as AI takes functions such as data collection, tracking, and reporting. I think 80% might be a little bit on the, the large size there, but you can't argue with that. AI technologies will be doing and can be doing a lot more around the things that we rely on in terms of data, which is, yes, there's data, there's tracking, there's reporting, there's insights, information, all of those things. But, from a PMO point of view, the problem that we had and the reason why we did the report was because there's limited insights into how the PMO will change in order to be able to meet this this figure if it came that way from Gartner. But one thing that we're very clear about is that the PMO should be at the table when AI is being explored in your delivery organization. And, these kind of technologies in a delivery organization, it's likely that the PMO will be the home to them, just as it is the PPM tools that we're using today. So that's why we created it. We want to explore more about potentially what's coming down the line for us within the PMO and how we might want to start thinking about getting prepared for that. We also looked at the internal drivers as to why is the PMO starting to get interested in this? And, we can see benefits and we can see what might be giving us a bit of a push. But, for clarity, just to take you through some of them. So remove ambiguity. Essentially, this is allowing us to be able to remove it in project information in terms of reducing human error and bias. And bias are a big part of it. I think everybody knows that AI doesn't eliminate it completely, but it certainly does, can do better than humans putting their own bias into onto data and into information. It's obviously reducing time, which is, repetitive tasks are not great. It also leads to a lot of errors when you're processing that data. And again, we've said it's about time to do some of that higher value work. We're always being asked to think about what can we do to better support the delivery organization as PMO practitioners. And half the time it's like, well, if we had the time, we could be doing X, Y, and Z. So it's reducing the time, but it's also obtainable because actually a lot of these AI technologies are affordable. They're easier to build and operate. Minimal coding is required, and actually products are not that difficult to understand. So it is within our grasp. The opportunities have doubled because we've got the accessibility to tools as well, without heavy commitments on labour and spend anymore. We also have, and this is an important part, is the opportunity to learn. We're able to ring fence some of this to minimise any security concerns with an impact on the other side of the rest of the organisation. And also, we actually demand it because we use a lot of this stuff outside of work now. There's no qualms about it. Every day we're coming into contact with, ways of interacting with people, with institutes, whatever it might be. And there's always elements of automation or AI in there, and we're using it, and we want to be able to bring that into our work because, you know, we can see that it can really make a difference to us. So those were some of the drivers to the PMO practitioners. And then we said, well, this is, you know, some of those people around that table have found themselves in a situation where, you know, they just had that opportunity. And does it just happen to you? Does it land on your lap? And no, it doesn't, because you have to be curious about some of this stuff. You have to be curious about the possibilities of what it could bring to the PMO, to project management, to your, you know, to your delivery organization. And it does, to be fair, lie with the leader of that PMO and also the people working within it. And also to be curious. And you have to ask yourself, you know, what is it to be curious? And find, you know, in yourself, if you're not that, but I'm assuming you are interested because you're on this session today. But again, it started with that. It was just about being curious, led to the push to be able to have some time to play. They needed to invest some time. It was always interesting, the art of the possible. They almost saw it as a bit of R&D, research and development time for the PMO. And some of them came up with this phrasing of, it's a bit of a data playground. And it does come from that desire and need to want to be able to do better with all this project data you have, because you have it here. And it's very frustrating not to be able to give some great insights because of various reasons. So they wanted, you know, created data playgrounds to be able to explore it further. And one of the really great things about this one is about presenting really great questions that the business can't ignore. It's about what are the questions that business leaders really want to know, but they don't have and can't get the answers to today. And we're talking about moonshot questions, so ones that really cannot be answered today. So, for example, what answer would really lead a sponsor to shut down a project? And it's those kind of questions that we know can't be answered today because we do not have that, you know, don't have that AI technologies in place that allow us to play around with that data to try and draw out these insights. But if you think about the impact of being able to pose a question to the business that you absolutely know they need the answer to, and then say, well, unfortunately, we can't do it today, but we can potentially do it tomorrow. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go forward. But it's an interesting one about, can you come up with a compelling question that your business absolutely wants to know today, but you know you can't answer, but you absolutely could certainly try to find it out by using some of this technology. The PMO also, they'd found was that they were willing to be guinea pigs. So is there anything going on in the business that was related to AI technologies? They were there. Can we get involved? Can we understand what's happening? And then we're able to use their journey, their experiences, and share it with other parts of the business that were also starting to get interested in this kind of stuff. So it feels like a very bottom-up approach in terms of how they're getting started with AI in the business, which was really interesting. They were also starting to think about getting roadmaps in place, because they were already thinking about, well, where's our PMO heading in the future? Thinking about things like, well, what building blocks are we going to need to get there? What, you know, who in the business is going to help us get there? What skills we're going to need, and what blockers we're going to need removing. So in other words, they were starting to think about a plan of where their PMO was going, and they couldn't ignore the fact that technologies were going to take and play a part in it, which led to them starting to think of it more in terms of roadmaps. And the beauty of it is that they were already then starting to think about, well, if we can get rid of some of this repetitive work, for example, what will we do with that extra time? Because our business is going to want to know that, and we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're going to be doing, it's going to be doing something that they absolutely want and need from us. Like I said, we've been talking about all of this AI technology. It is about data. That's ultimately what we're talking about. From a PMO level, right now, this is what is the underpinning thing to it. It's the data. And there are some fundamental questions that need asking And the answers will be different, obviously, to wherever it is you're working. But fundamentally, when we're talking about what data, we will be very clear about the difference between project data and project management data. So project data being data, for example, that might come out of, I don't know, if you're doing a construction project and you've got health and safety type stuff, or people going in and out of a site each day, that's project data. Project management data will be things like costs and risks and schedule numbers and things like that. So it's the stuff that's going for project management side. So again, there's, trying to understand what it is that we want of the technologies. What are we going to, what data are we talking about that we want to be able to use? Because that leads us on to, so, well, how do we find it? And the guys came up with a really interesting way of thinking about it, is that we're doing three things. We are data hunters, we're data gathering, and then we're data farmers. So ultimately, we're talking about new and existing data, but we have to literally hunt it down. We know it's there, we just got to find it. So we're hunting it down. So we're data hunters. Then we're gathering this all together. And then ultimately, the data farmer role is about nurturing and maturing the data sources and the storage of the data. So it's quite a nice way to think about it. But ultimately, that's what the PMO is going to be doing, is the three of them. They were very clear that the data does not belong to the PMO, it belongs to the project, which might seem pretty obvious, but sometimes it's really good to clarify. The PMO in this sense is a facilitator and a translator of data. They cleanse it, they can structure it, they can use it for insights, and they can ultimately provide guidance on how the project can improve on their data, but it's not their data. It's coming, it belongs to that project. And where is it? And I mentioned before, one of the biggest barriers for an organization to become very data driven is about data being stored in silos. So, the PMO can become the custodian of project related data, responsible for ensuring it's clean and structured and usable and providing access for people who wish to be able to see it. And the interesting thing is about where is it? It's very likely that it will be some kind of central tool, perhaps a PPM tool, something where there's a central repository for that delivery organization. And what we want to do with it is essentially there's two different things. It depends if we're a reactive or we want to be a more proactive PMO. First one is that we can be the funnel or the conduit for data to pass from the project. It needs to be cleaned up, information's extracted, and then we send it out. We do that today, very much to projects, to senior managers. But we can go further. So the second thing we could be doing is going further by providing intelligence and getting more insights from that data, rather than just presenting the figures and the numbers. So one aspect's very reactive, you could say, which is what many of us are today. But there's that room to be proactive, most definitely. So we need to get to grips with data, and one of the big aspects is that data literacy, which means that being able to be fluent in it in terms of the terminology, to have that conversation about data, being analytical, being able to use data visualizations to learn more about it and to mentor others and to help others within the organization about data literacy. And then of course the organization needs a data culture. What are the principles or rules of engagement around data? Each organization should have one, but does it really? And do people know about it? What came out of this is that there are absolutely different roles that we need to consider. And the PMO aspect of it, you can see the data analysts and data scientists are very much, on that data side. But the PMO aspect of this is that data translator is, this is where we come in. And the quote here, which was, we need to have an explainer who bridges the gap between the technology and the data specialists and the business leaders. We're already doing this to some degree. So where is the threat if we use AI technologies to do more of it and get better at it? This is what we already do. When we're doing reporting, we're taking project data from a project and helping to pull out the parts, change that data information that allows senior execs to read it better, to understand it better, to comprehend and to make their decisions. So we're already doing the role. So it's perhaps more, a more formal role around what that will mean for the PMO in terms of data translation. The switching slightly now is to RPA. One of the reasons why we wanted to pull this out particularly is because PMO practitioners found that RPA was a lot easier to start with than some of the things that were relying a lot heavily on data. So what we're talking about here with RPA is it says it's robotic process automation. So it's automating processes. So they found that actually we can start doing this kind of stuff by just starting with the PMO team to just generate some ideas about what processes could be automated. Because absolutely, the PMO knows a lot about the processes. You know, if we are the function that has and owns and creates the project management processes, we absolutely can think about those processes into a detail as to what, could it be automated and how we could start to do that. Because the second part of the role is obviously to start doing a workflow diagram to see whether you can actually do that and what kind of tools and programs can be used. From that, we've started to be able to play around. Like I said, you can ring fence, you can have a data playground. You can start to ring fence and try some of this stuff without it impacting anything else. And there's an example of a tool that they were talking about that they use. And then also starting to look a bit further about, talking to the IT departments about how we could potentially start to do this a little bit more, and then what do they need in order to be able to do it, and there's that's when security questions start to come up and what have you. But also let's start with a simple process first and learn from it and build from it. And we thought, well, if we're going to talk about this, we absolutely have to do it ourselves. So we created our own little bot. It's called Cyril. It's a PMO flash mob bot. And he's responsible just for doing some simple processing of people that were attending events, being able to put that into, simple spreadsheets, add up some columns, find, all of that kind of really simple stuff, from people clicking a button on our website to, to ultimately getting an email to attend an event, and all the back office stuff that goes in to support that. And it's a simple process, really. So people have, from our crowd around PMO flash mob, some of the people have already started to do a simple process for them would be that all the project status reports from project managers, so let's just say 10 projects, 10 project managers, each one of them filling out a similar template or same template, coming into one place, and the robot or whatever it is they're using, we like to give them names because it feels like they're an extra member of the PMO team. They're then able to take that information, do some weird and wonderful stuff with it, and out pops a report at the end. All that consolidation work, all that cut and paste work from an individual, completely gone. There you go. Cyril the bot is on the case and has done it literally in seconds. To make it sound easy, these things never that easy, but it's possible, and you can start doing it if you're curious and like to think about the PMO having a little bit of R&D elements to it. This is perhaps the thing that you should be thinking about in terms of that research and development. And then just finally, just some nuggets for you to take away from what we'd found from talking to practitioners about this, is that we really do need to understand what the benefits are of adopting a data-driven PMO. It's the questions that we can't give answers today. It's those senior execs that are needing answers for certain questions that we can't give it to them. We just, don't have that ability, or data's in many different places. We know that if we can start to consolidate some of this stuff and utilize some of the technologies, we might uncover some of the answers to these questions. We've also got to be able to help the business understand what the PMO is capable of providing in this respect. In investments, it's all about creating visions and roadmaps and the benefits, using that benefit statement and findings from the data playground to make that case for investment. And again, this is from practitioners that have started going down this road, and this is what they've been doing. From a leadership point of view, this is about showing real leadership within the PMO or of the PMO. So being quite strategic in your aims, being an exemplar, to the PMO team and being a partner to the business, really. I think sometimes with this kind of thing where you're adopting something that's not really been done in many other departments, sometimes you might find that you're out there alone. But it's just to think about what kind of leadership you'll be demonstrating on this journey. This is also about curious people, but not necessarily just within the PMO, because it's also about finding project managers and senior stakeholders, delivery team members and members of the PMO, but do want to, who are curious about it and do want to start working on something like this together. It doesn't have to just be, a PMO thing. It has to bring in the people within delivery organization who it's going to impact. And, you need to be mindful of the detractors. You absolutely will get them. But you also need to think about how you're going to use the cheerleaders and the promoters as well in order to further the cause. There's also obviously a massive mind shift here, because if you think about it, the PMO is often seen as we use data for control. PMO is often being seen as the control center, the control function. And actually, we're using data to manage uncertainty. That's a change. It's a change from using data to control to using data to manage uncertainty. It's a shift. It's a difference. And it's whether, the PMO is going to be able to carry that off. It's very much a change management activity. A hybrid is that we're looking for a balanced skill set from the PMO. We've got the hard facts side of what we're talking about, which is cost, time, resource, scope type data. And then we've got the people side. We need the stakeholder, the comms, all that kind of people elements to it. So we're not talking about, all becoming data freaks. We absolutely know that the people elements of the job that we do in PMO and supporting people is just obviously is important and is never going to go away. From a data point of view, we've mentioned that data hunter role, the gatherer, the farmer. We should have already enough data to get started with this. It's not like we've got to start afresh with gathering data. We've got it. It's just a case of finding it. So it's that data hunter role straight away. From that, you start to find some insights. It doesn't need to be amazing. You just need to start working through the process to see how does it work? How can we start to get information out of data and get some insights? We'll learn the lessons along the way. We'll find the root cause of some of those problems. And we don't expect the data to be perfect, because you can guarantee you're going to spend a lot of time cleansing it. It's just the nature of the beast. And then finally, from an organizational point of view, there's going to be both top down and bottom up in terms of adopting AI technologies. It's just that our PMO practitioners found that because they were curious and they were given a little bit of time to play and to be curious and to try stuff out, they'd already started doing things, while at the senior end of the organization, that top down, things were starting to happen there. And then hopefully there's meat in the middle. So it's not often a case of waiting around to see what your organization is going to do in this field. It's, are you curious enough to try and start to uncover how AI technologies could be working within the project organization, within the PMO. Whistle stop, I know it's very quick, but there's a lot more insights in the report. It's an easy read. Obviously, from our point of view, we wanted to try and take out some of the sting of the technical and, have to be a specialist around data and stuff, because we're ultimately people that are working in projects, and we do many different aspects in terms of that support of projects. The technology aspect is just one bit, the data is just one bit. So it should be an easy read for you if you're not really up and au fait with this kind of stuff. That's where you can go and find it. And and if you're not familiar with us already, make sure you go and hunt us out. Good. So that's me. That's it. That's done. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll pass over now to Lindsay again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay, for that excellent presentation. Very informative. Go ahead and transition on to our next section here. Following on to that, I'd like to introduce Matt Muldoon, the Chief Product Officer here at KeyedIn, to shed a little light on what these concepts look like in practice. Matt is a seasoned product leader, having led our own products here at KeyedIn for the past few years, and prior to that, holding various management roles at prominent software companies such as Sage and Epicor. Currently, Matt is leading our product vision and roadmap, working closely with many of our customers and various PMO luminaries, as well as technology partners and vendors that give him a unique perspective on this very real and very imminent frontier. I think Matt also appreciates dogs and gin, so I'm sensing a good time in the near future here. So welcome, Matt, and thank you for taking us through this AI session today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. And thank you, Lindsay, for that enlightening presentation. I've had an interest in AI for a while, primarily because previous businesses that I worked at, most specifically Sage Software, had started down the road of using AI in a couple of areas. A big one was machine learning. Another one was actually AI in the area of human-machine interface, so chatbots, that type of thing. And when we went down the machine learning route, the results were, to say the least, startling, because it turned out that even in things, transactions such as getting a payment, you could start to do some analysis of the behaviors of the parties to see if their behaviors were changing to indicate something like an issue. And given the fact that we as project managers and PMO leaders spend our lives creating data, and I love what Lindsay said about data. It's a key element of what we need to do, is to make sure that the data is correctly identified, and more importantly, we help the data scientists to interpret what it is. But when you get that data and you start to point algorithms at it, it finds amazing patterns that people don't necessarily see, or if they do see it, it's later, when it's almost too late to change perhaps a behavior that you want to modify in order to bring out a different outcome. Now, what do I mean by that? If I just take a look at this, there's 4 things that we can do with AI. And each of those gives us the ability as PMO leaders to provide better service to the business. A lot of this, by the way, from a PM point of view, was generated, the thoughts that go behind this, by a discussion I had with one of our customers who happily is represented here today. And the CIO there had said that they had a very good track record of delivering projects successfully, but he wanted to do it even better. The problem was that often when they found a problem, it was almost too late in the few times when a project was spinning off course. And so what he was looking for was a tool that would identify what those problems were and catch the behaviors that generated those areas before a human might do that. So just to see the patterns in the behavior that were indicating certain things. And first thing you had to do is identify what those were. And that from that to here has led KeyedIn to the point where we've now done some work on AI. We've worked with this organization on a proof of concept, and have spent a lot of time identifying what type of benefits and what type of information we can generate for businesses as a result of using AI. And there's 4 areas that we can give to people. The first one is predictive analytics, taking a look at the past, and from the past, identifying particular things that may indicate something that might happen in the future. And then using machine learning, continuing to look at that information and having the machine identify changes in that behavior, or to start modifying the algorithm as time goes on. So it doesn't require a human to help massage the data. Now they're doing it themselves. Decision support, when I'm going to make a decision, if I decide what the criteria are and I can use the machine to help identify the particular data pieces that identify that criteria, we take out some of the bias that you can often find. Now, I did see a question about the fact that machine learning can drive bias, and that is if you build the algorithm incorrectly, you can have it biased towards your opinion. Now, that's part of using a data scientist who isn't necessarily emotionally attached to the data. You get somebody from an outside view, and you help them to understand what to look at, but they decide what to look for. And the last bit is to really get the system to look objectively at what it is that makes your business successful, for example. So the business acumen side of things, finding out how I can use what I have better. So resources, for example. At KeyedIn, we have examples of customers who come to us and said that they've increased their throughput of projects through better use of analytical data, not necessarily AI-driven yet, but through the use of manually interpreted analytical data, and have been able to increase their throughput by 30 to 50% using the same level of staff. So that it's not like we're replacing the staff. What we're doing is finding ways to make them more efficient, reducing their workload in areas that aren't necessarily economically beneficial, and focusing on stuff that does drive benefits for the business. So a couple of examples from a predictive analytics point of view. One of the things that PPM systems will do is allow you to create the ability to line up a number of projects, either ongoing or those that you are ideating, and looking at them from an objective scoring point of view to say, does this fit with our current strategic goals? Is it, predicted to be economically beneficial? Is it going to drive positive outcomes to the business, etc.? And for the objective side of things, you can use the algorithms to go through and review all of the indicators in the ideation and in the project to say, yes, this looks like a well-scored project. Of course, there's always subjective scores as well, which we bring the human beings into play to say, this is something that I wish to sponsor. This is an area that fits into our particular current roadmap, etc. And combined to those, we can create a powerful scoring tool that allows you to decide which projects to do, which projects to carry on, and possibly more importantly, which projects to scrap. It's interesting, this area for KeyedIn became a lot more important when COVID kicked in, because suddenly there were a lot of projects out there. And as one of the analysts said, when times are good, you can do the projects and a few fall out. When times look like they're going to be difficult, you have to make harder decisions about dropping projects. And one of the things you need to do is to have a proper scoring mechanism so you can justify the fact that you've done so. Now, this is something that we're talking about when I was talking about our customer, the early detection of behaviors, for example. So if we take a look at the projects that you have in your system and those, we've identified the various outcomes, then we start to look at everything that's associated with the project, and you'd be amazed at the pieces of data. Everything from how the time cards were loaded, who was involved in the project, what kind of risks and issues arose, the number of projects, the size of the project, the geography of the project, all of that. And then you start to develop, you see patterns that correlate to particular outcomes. And the system is not going to be 100% accurate. That's not the point. What it's going to do is it's going to give you indicators to say, of the 100 projects that you have right now, these 5 are showing a high correlation to the fact that they may have a negative outcome. And so those are the things that you really need to focus on today. So when you look at your portfolio, everything's ticking along nicely. You do have some identified risks for the managers, things like that. But the system will say, actually, why don't you take a look at these 5 as well and see if there's something in there that we might need to change, and here are what the indicators are. And the idea there is you have a starting place to be much more efficient about bringing something back on track than doing it later when you know how far it's off track. It's very hard to correct at that point. And instead you result in late timings or essentially unsuccessful transactions. And decision support, well, the biggest one, and I do come from an ERP, MRP background, is identification of the right resource at the right time for the right thing. And MRP has been around for a long time, and MRP is essentially a form of AI because what it allows you to do is to take a massive data, bring it together, and then analyze it to say, if all of these things are going to happen in this order at this time, because we have these projects on the go, what is the optimal way to source these? And should I move them around a little bit to ensure that everything is going to hit their due date, but some might be moved forward because there are resources that are going to need to be somewhere else later. Some things might need to be moved back. We may need to adjust the plan a little bit and come back with a number of alternative ways to meet the requirement, and then analyze those against the best economic and resource efficient outcomes to say, this is the way you need to do it. And the thing is, it's got to happen all the time. Because every day new projects come up, every day new needs for resources. Things change, like people take vacation. The organization decides it's going to move in a new direction. And so we need an automated tool to keep running and ultimately tell us where our resources need to be. On top of that, you've got to always have the ability intelligently to have the system also understand that the changes take time to come into play. So it has to take into the information that you give it on what kind of lead you need, for example, on making a project change and how that's going to be implemented. And the last one, of course, is business information. Having the system help you, as Lindsay was saying, gather the information that, as PMO leaders at the moment, a lot of that gets done manually to create the report, for example. But also, as you go forward, to get it to start giving you interpretive responses to that. It takes a look and it sees a pattern that we are moving in the right direction. We are becoming X more efficient, and we can accelerate that by doing Y. Or the fact that the business is, gross margin is going down on the projects. However, the benefits of the projects are growing at the same correlated rate as the gross margin is. And so therefore, it's actually, we're still in the right direction, but we need to refine how we manage our costs. And the last thing, of course, is, as I said before, success and failure prediction early on, so that we can do things about either one, canceling projects that are going to fail, identifying what we can do to correct them, or finding a different way to deliver what's needed. So again, how can AI help? Now, instead of the process, it's the outcome. Well, the first one is by reducing uncertainty, by looking at the variables and making sure that, if not controlled, at least identified in a way that the business can act on them in order to bring about the right outcome. Make sure that all the reporting, all of the data as it is being delivered to the business is consistent. That way, when your bosses take a look at it, they are comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. Machines do that very well because they don't interpret as they go. They simply deliver the information and give you some correlative outcomes that are mathematically driven. Improve your projections when you get your math right, and this is where the data scientists come in. The outcomes that are predicted are much more accurate, and they come in, as I said before, consistently. And then the beauty of that is all of these things allow you to drive ROI. We've got some great quotes from our customers about how information-driven businesses do increase their ROI. And one of the key things there is by making sure that you're using your resources most effectively. That doesn't mean working them 80 hours a week. What it means to be doing is that the 40 hours a week that they are working needs to be in the most efficient and most constructive manner. Taking away those mundane tasks that they have to do all the time that take away from their ability to actually produce viable work. An example of that is a project robot that allows the system to help capture time. So we talk about one of the things is human language interaction, allowing the consultant to basically query how much time they had and on what projects on a day in some type of English language conversation, and then confirming back that that's what I did. And the system fills out the time card. When the time card is done, it can tell the system to submit it, and the robot can actually look to see, does it match, or is it within a series of parameters that are close to the working pattern we expected them to do? If so, then we'll go ahead and approve that. Or is it on projects or areas that require special approval? And if so, I'll pass it on to those people and remind them that they need to go ahead and do that. Once again, reducing the time it takes to carry out the non-economic tasks to let them focus on the interesting part of their job, which is working with the rest of the business. Now, one thing about AI, Lindsay talked about the threats. There's some cautions with it. I mean, it is a software product. It can have bias if you build it in yourselves. But this is where one of the things you want to do is you want to work with third-party data scientists, and I don't mean necessarily third-party from the business, but outside the PMO, to have them look at the data from a purely mathematical point of view. The second thing, and the most important, is that it is a learning tool, and it needs to be constantly taught. And that's where it says it's not a set it and forget it process. It needs to be run constantly. The data that it is fed often needs to be modified as we see behaviors coming into play, and excuse me, understand that the indicators of those behaviors will possibly need more detail. So we adjust the data that we have the tool look at, as in we adjust the data set, not the actual data itself. And we constantly have to bring our human judgment into play. It says it requires human analysis. One of the things I've done a lot of work in the areas of process automation, machine learning, and also things like business process management. And what you have to do in all of these processes is introduce human judgment to make sure, one, that the outcomes that are predicted are correctly being interpreted, but two, that the actions taken are handled by someone who has the judgment to make sure that it's the right thing for the business. And you know, you could point a machine at a pool of labor, and it will come back and say, these people aren't doing what they should be doing, find somebody else. Well, that's open to a lot of interpretation. And part of that is the machine doesn't understand anything but the numbers that it's fed. Human beings need to go in and analyze that information and provide another layer on it. And this is where I don't see people being replaced. I see people being developed. So now I stop being a data generator and I start being a data interpreter, which is exactly what Lindsay was saying. I take the information back and then I look at it from a human and a judgmental point of view and decide, is this the correct course of action to take? Or in the case of our customer, I take what I get and I go back and I review the data on the areas that are designated as being of concern. And I apply my judgment to say, should we do something about that? And we learn from that and we try to go back and teach some of that information to the machine again. And constantly we're refining what we're learning. One of the things that I have seen over time in AI is that the output of the algorithm changes and becomes generally more refined, but then it also will branch into other areas that you hadn't thought of before. And that's where the real interesting bit comes out and where you can get curious. It's not a replacement for people. And I would never agree with that. What it is, it's an enabler for people, and it allows them to have the ability to do the interesting part of their job without necessarily having to do the mundane, and it allows them to be more effective at the interesting things that they do. As I said, there's lots of use cases and lots of implications in those use cases. You need to make sure that you start out simple, come up with a simple idea that you want to manage, either a process from an automation point of view, a small project pool that you want to manage the resources for, or a particular use case as in a question that you want answered that you can do something about, and then start looking at the data. And that's the biggest thing of all, is having good data. We found this in our proof of concept. We had to make sure that an outcome in the history was always indicated. You have to decide what is success, what is failure, what is on time, what is late, whatever you want to do. How do I decide what the outcome was of the data that I had, so that the machine can start looking for correlative information to tell me what's going to be the outcome of things that are going to take place in the future. And that's where we move from data analytics to true machine learning, and it starts to come with interpretive information. They all tie together, and they're all part of using, a tool that is much faster at processing mathematically data sets to give us some insights in order, as managers and as humans, to do our jobs better. So just a couple of takeaways. What is AI? It's data analysis. It uses Bayes' theorem primarily to apply probability theory to particular data sets to see whether they are indicative of a particular outcome. They are time-based. One of the things you've got to make sure you do is that you give the system a particular set of time to look over, and generally recently, because behaviors of businesses change, in order to interpret how it's going to happen in the future.